Have you heard of Able? Able is built by AI engineers in San Francisco, and it takes body cam footage and turns it into police reports, using both visual data and transcripts to gather a full picture of the events. If your agency is still writing reports, then it's time to upgrade and liberate one-third of patrol time for more important things, like actual policing. Go to ablepolice.com, that's ABEL police.com to learn more. This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by Matt Donnelly. Matt is a veteran. He's a full-time, we'll talk about his full-time work as it pertains to not his therapy, but how his therapy is an additional thing that he's taking on as a therapist, and we'll get into that too. But we are here to talk about all things mental health, guidance, coaching, leadership, mindset, being a family man, all of it. So without further ado, Matt, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Dude, it's a pleasure and it's a real honor to be here. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And I feel like it was weeks and weeks that we connected, and it's one of those kind of connecting conversations, talking about some of your social media, some of the posts, some of the messaging that we've had back and forth on some of these very constructive themes, but then talking about what we could talk about and learning more about you and your background. And like I said, a lot of those conversations, generally, I'm like, man, we should have recorded this thing just
Yeah.
because there's so many takeaways in us just spinning off and riffing off these different concepts and ideas that, I've shared many times. A lot of those themes are things that I just think we need more as a society, and we need more, especially as men in our society, not because I want to create like a divide, but because that's what I can speak to. That's the experience I have.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%, man. Things can get all tied in together. I think, if we do like a big overview understanding of like, especially now today where we are as a society, culturally, even if you
Mhm.
want to get more specific, because what we see out there on the West Coast for you is different what we see out here with me in Tennessee, right?
Mhm.
Or, say New York or Florida or Texas, Montana or California. It can vary quite a bit, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that are intertwined with us as men, just being a good human being, But it's like, okay, well, hey, you need to be a man. Okay, well, great, yeah, I'm gonna be a man, but how the hell is that person defining it?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Lots can go into that, like their exposure growing up, the environments they were in, what particularly they were modeled, not even necessarily by parents. Relating over to the LE side of things, if we dug into the weeds of that, we can go in and actually understand, there's a reason why some of these young men, we'll call them young men, teenagers or even younger, get
Yeah.
pulled into gangs. Why? Why is that? Well, it's a impoverished society. We won't get too much into bureaucratic politics with it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change that they were raised up into an environment without a lot of options, and maybe their dad wasn't around. But
Yeah.
what they were searching for, which is that model, they found whatever they could find, and that's what kind of shaped and formed who they became.
Yeah.
So it gets into tons of areas that I think not just the veteran community and the LE community can relate to and definitely have a deep understanding with, but really just us as a whole in society.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot, and I don't want to take it too far down a tangent or rabbit hole, but there's a lot that perks up in me. One is that, a lot of my personal story is having a really difficult and, borderline, if you even want to call it a relationship with my dad, and what, my grasp or perception of, being a man was, and discovering that and going on my life journey and ending up here in this very archetypical kind of warrior thing, through
Mhm.
most of my life, young life, not being anywhere inclined towards that. But as I kept building the blocks and finding my way, I mean, as I've shared before, like I feel like I had to prove myself, or I wanted to prove myself in this
Mhm.
very, very literal representation of that. At the same time, I think it is valuable to consider some of the societal impacts, talking about gang culture or this absent fatherism, that's
Mhm.
very prevalent in a lot of places. Oftentimes socioeconomics are a piece of that. At the same time, I've also had kind of that those 2 a.m. in the morning chats with like coworkers or buddies about what would help society. And generally it's just more parental involvement, right? More community
Mhm.
involvement, more looking out for, because as you pointed out, like gang culture, and again, I know that literally anything you say can be taken such a way, but for a lot of people that is the most viable option. I'm not making an
Mhm.
excuse for it. I'm saying
Yeah.
I can understand and start to understand some of the dynamics if that is what your family brings you up into, that's all you know, and
Mhm.
or if that's the only viable way you think you can help provide for your family and your younger siblings that are, I mean, that's you trying to put food on the table. Again, not an excuse, and I think that's
Yeah.
where a lot of times cops have a difficulty kind of grappling with that because they don't want to excuse it, but also, we don't get a lot of ground by drawing these really black and white stark comparisons, like good and bad, in my estimation.
Yeah. Dude, you make a phenomenal point. It's kind of what I do with therapy too with
Mm,
all my clients. So it's like I take this idea of what's right and wrong, good and bad. I want you to ball that piece of shit up, that ideology, and let's throw it out the window right now.
mm,
Okay? Because regardless if it's right or wrong, good or bad, we still have what is.
mm,
And
mhm,
in therapy, we're looking at what are the issues that you're here for? What can I do to help you, right? I'm not going to deny, sure, in conversations in therapy with clients, yeah, we're going to talk about, dude, no, that was a bad choice. Maybe we need to rethink that next time, right?
yeah,
Can you learn
yeah,
from this? Or, yeah, that was a really good decision. Like, I'm glad you were able to manage that situation so well. They have its place, but in order for us to understand why and to figure out the how do we fix this? LE force. How do we stop a increasing rise of criminals and criminal activity? Well, yeah, we have to put that bias of right and wrong. I don't care if it's 99%, accepted as right or wrong within the society. Sure, we can, I think the majority of people can sit here and agree with that, but that doesn't help us. That doesn't help solve, okay, well, how do we help these young boys
mhm,
have a better influence in their life? How do we help these young men be able to apply discretion and give them the guidance they need to actually have a fighting chance, right? Because if all we just say is, yeah, bad, 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 you know, who are we really to blame at that point?
yeah. And I've shared this, but early in my career, and I grew up very like black and white, good and bad. I was a rule follower, like a very like kind of goody two shoes,
Mhm.
and with that, and I'll speak for myself so people don't get twisted, but with it came a lot of judgment, right? And a lot of that came from my own self judgment of when I misstepped and all that, and how I was raised. Like you're on the straight and narrow, and if you stepped off, like there are significant consequences. But coming in as a young man being a police officer, it did me no favors. It did my perception of the world no favors, and it did the community I was trying to serve no favors when I was extremely judgmental.
Mhm.
And I actually had that kind of virtue signaling or like value placed on what people were doing right and wrong, right? To have like literally lecture somebody as a 22-year-old guy on their life's choices, like what does that get you? Like
Mhm.
trying to be like the authority and drugs are bad, okay, and all this stuff, rather than just being like, hey man, like you said earlier, it is what it is. I love that phrase for just recognizing like let's not like belabor this thing. Let's just take it at face value. At the same time, like not using that phrase as like an excuse to not try. So what I mean
Yeah.
by that is like it is what it is, man. Okay, cool. Like I arrested you, you ran, you fought, there was force used. I read your rights and I say, hey man, sorry we're in this situation. I'm glad you didn't hurt us. I'm kind of pissed that you tried, but here's where we're at. You're
Mhm.
under arrest for this and this. I'm gonna talk to you like a person, like an adult, right? It doesn't do me
Yeah.
any good to lecture you and you actually clam up. It's just hey man, that wasn't cool, but I'm going to treat you like a human. And generally, when you have that type of interaction, people are like, they might actually talk to you. They might actually provide some statements that help the case. And it's not
Mhm.
just to like get that angle, but so many times when I had that, let's say, emotional maturity to separate out what I was talking about earlier, so many people, and I've seen this like time and time again through officers that work with me or under supervision. But when they just talk to people like they're people, so often people are like, "Hey, thanks for being cool," and then it's like done. Like we're not playing any games; it's just done. Like you go to jail, you do whatever. But we have this thing that we just keep on trucking along rather than trying to create this animosity, like kind of for what?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly, man. Talking to people, just keeping it real,
Hmm.
in essence, that's really, I think, is very effective. And, whether it's therapy or general interactions with the public or in the LE profession, active duty side, it doesn't matter. Communications, it comes down to just being real. I mean, I think we could all, especially for the listeners, think of a time you walked up and for whatever reason, it's irrelevant, but you started having a conversation with someone and they're really uptight, right? They've
Hmm.
got something up their ass that day. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they're just having issues with anxiety. Who knows? But, you know, if you notice, if you talk to someone in that calming manner, just providing that respect, and I know I've heard you say that on one of your podcasts about how to just that respect isn't just earned, you should be giving it, right?
Yeah.
It is remarkable to see the outcomes on the differences. I mean, we can get into a story too. I had, just getting a standard pullover, and this was in a little bit rougher time of my life. So I ride motorcycles, and I was flying colors. I wasn't a patch member of an MC or anything like that, but I definitely, in California, you're more than likely going to be Hell's Angels supporter, right? And I mean, me and my buddies, we had 81 support patches and everything, and CHP out there were tend to be the most stringent and cautious.
Hmm. Yeah.
So he pulled me over, but I mean, right away, I helped set the tone by just being respectful. The guy said, "Hey, did you see me?" I said, "No, I honestly, I didn't even see it till I saw your lights hit the reflection of the stop sign, and that's when I pulled over." And I said, "Hey, sir, I'm gonna put my kickstand down. Okay, and I'm gonna dismount my bike right now." Just let him know every instruction, trying to just give him that reassurance, like, "Look, dude, you're just doing your job.
Hmm.
I'm not doing anything wrong here. You pulled me over. It's not a big deal. Hey, I'm gonna reach in my bag. My wallet's in my bag. In this pocket here. I'm gonna open that up. Okay?" Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Just one of those types of things I think can help set that tone. And if we apply that mentality of approaching conversations in that manner, I think we can have a lot more desirable outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's like a helpful thing to remember, like what's the goal? And so often we can be so reactive, right? In
Mhm,
that we're going to be reactive when we're emotional, we're going to be reactive when we're stressed, we're going to be reactive when we don't really know what the goal is, right? And we're just literally just like winging it. And so like for the officer, the goal is to have a safe interaction where learning has occurred or a citation has been issued or something, right? And
mhm,
then for the motorist, the goal is to have a safe interaction where you receive what you're going to receive, right? And hopefully it's only a citation or it's only a warning. And
yeah.
everything that happens in between that or whether you stay on that track for that goal or not is based on those two people, right?
Mhm,
And one person can make the intentional decision, no, we're not going to be that goal, we're going to go to this other goal, right? Whether it's the motorist saying like I'm going to get away or I'm going to fight it out or I'm not going back to jail and I'm a third striker and I have warrants or whatever, but
mhm,
we may not know that. But I think if we have that goal, kind of like to break it down for the cop again, it's like we want it to be a safe interaction, and so we have to only read off of what we train and what we know and what we see. But
mhm,
can you do that while still being courteous and respectful? Can you do that um, without having someone lose their, I suppose, position in that, right? Because so
mhm,
often conflict, especially with people that, you mentioned like, support club, but like, let's say someone actually gang affiliated, that is
mhm,
the fastest way you can go to a derailment and like extreme conflict is a show of disrespect.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
can you avoid that and still accomplish what you seek out to accomplish?
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, that's perfectly said. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man. So we've gone a lot of different ways already, but I do kind of want to circle back and go back to you. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your coming up, your background story, and then as you've gone into the military, and then what prompted, this probably crash course, but like what prompted you to go into learn how to be a therapist and now practice, with, as I nodded to, like a completely different full-time job that,
Mhm.
that supports you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, yeah, let's see. So I was adopted from South Korea. I was just 4 months old when I came over here to the United States. So, been in the country, naturalized citizen, all my life. I grew up in Maryland. Um, I had great parents. I had a great childhood too. My parents and my family always very supportive. I definitely struggled mentally though. I think as a kid, I couldn't make sense of a lot of things. Definitely had a lot of hard times growing up. So
Mm,
went through. There's points where I was on medication, and then I went through a pretty life transforming experience where it involved acupuncture. It was a real long treatment.
mm,
It didn't start that way, but it was
yeah,
multiple sessions up to,
interesting.
and that was probably as a teenager my biggest milestone as seeing like an improvement with my own like mental health. I think a lot of it for me was like a loss of identity, and bringing in like the psychotherapy side of it or the psychology side of it and understanding things. There California did one great thing, and sorry, I'm kind of talking shit on California, but they did
It's fine.
one
I don't
good
live in
thing
California.
with with mental health. Sorry for anyone who's in California, but one of the things they did about children specifically is they isolated down an understanding about a 0 to 5 program. And when I was in California, and I left California in 2022, they were really harping on that, and good on them for it because there is hard evidence, factual evidence that shows what happens from 0 to 5, even from the time of conception, really can impact how someone
Hmm.
turns out to be.
Yeah.
Of course, there's genetics that are involved. That's not as evidence-based, that's studied and passed down as information for people to at least be aware of. But 0 to 5 is the most crucial years that we can have. Somewhere in those probably 4 months, that when I was still in South Korea, there was probably some stuff that happened. Not really sure. The privacy over in South Korea, especially in the late 80s, was very, very strict. I mean, they just would literally ask the mother's name and her age, and that was it. And they just wanted to know the name, just simply know what to call it, right?
Mm,
You
mhm.
could say whatever name you wanted, and that was all the information they really had. They would get other information, but there was also a breakdown between the adoption agencies and what they actually provided.
Mhm.
Americans,
Yeah.
kind of the upsell of trying to promote adopting children versus what was the reality on paper.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't anything drastic. It could just be, you know, well, this married couple, they just they didn't have the means to take care of a child, so they gave it up for adoption. That's what they wrote down and sold to the American adoption agencies versus like, well, it was a single mother and she was having a hard time in her life. And
Mhm.
it could be like an alteration of that just to make it, you know, more appealing for the
Yeah.
American people, right?
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, pretty typical childhood. Like I said, I had really good parents. I actually dropped out of school my junior year, and I was still going through some struggles. I went the first day of my junior year, and being a very rebellious young teenager, I just
First
walked
day.
in, and my schedule was wrong compared to what they're supposed to do when we arranged it, in my sophomore year. And I walked in and said, "This is bullshit. Y'all fucked this up. I'm not coming back." And I literally signed myself out of the office, and I walked home and never went back again. Funny, I did get my GED, and in Maryland, there wasn't really a clear way to separate high school diploma versus a GED. So like my GED says Maryland high school diploma right on top. So I graduated a year early. That summer, I went and took the GED test and ended up having a certificate in my hand. I was pretty much working full time since I was like 14, and I was just kind of lost for direction. Military kind of came up, as I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. Um,
Mhm.
at the time, I did not want to go into combat, and I said, okay, well, what can I do? Still serve the country. And I was like, all right, well, mechanics kind of interest me, and I became a aviation instructional mechanic. in the Navy, and I worked on F-18 Super Hornets fighter aircraft my whole career. So um, did 10 years in the Navy, went in 2006, left in 2016, and I was stationed at NAS Lemoore, Naval Air Station Lemoore, my whole time. So we were home based out of there, but anyone who's familiar with the Navy, that you have basically two main fighter bases in the country, and that's one being NAS Lemoore and the other one being Virginia Beach, Virginia. So East and West Coast. Once you're in that community, a lot of people get stuck in that community. It's hard to get out of it. So unless you go do an overseas tour. So I was there. I was at the training command, which was at the time Strike Fighter Squadron 122. And then I went over to Strike Fighter Squadron, which is also known as VFA 154, and that's where I had the bulk of my career. I spent 5 years in that command, and it was really good. Speaking on leadership, that's I was very fortunate, and anyone who is, it doesn't matter what branch of the military you're in. I think everyone can attest to the fact that the leadership that you get served or you're serving under, that you fall into whatever unit or battalion or command or squadron that you might go to, kind of the roll of the dice, right? You don't really know, and it's just sort of luck of the draw. Some guys have some really good experiences, like myself. Other guys, not so much. So I've had a little bit of both, but I had really good guys that brought me up, raised me up in the Navy, as I like to say. Some real old school guys where we learned, how to, work your ass off. You're going to put in the work, and we're work hard and party harder. So that was kind of the mentality that I was taught as a young man. I was only barely 19 years old, when I went to my first command. So when I was at my seagoing command, which was a deployable command, the training command, we were gone a lot, quite frequently, but we were never on deployments. My BFA 154, that was one great experience. That's the highlight of my career for sure. I did 3 different deployments. We were detached dozens of times all over the country. Like I said, really good leadership. I was able to make Sailor of the Year at that command. I think 2012, and just really good guys. And then helping me guide my career and figure out what to do for the next steps, right? And then my final tour was over at the schoolhouse, which is known as the Center of Naval Aviation Technical Training Unit for Lemoore, one of the main training units for aviation in the country. And that place was real political because everything was like competitive, right? Of course, in the military, I mean, LE, it's just, crossover on that, on just what's the next step? What's the next qualification, right? How do you be better than the next guy? And especially when it came to competing for evaluations, and that definitely had an impact on your career and your advancement to the next rank. So that command, we always knew, it was notorious for the fact that because there's only E5s and E6s in the command as far as the enlisted side, it was very, very competitive, which brought out a lot of bad things, a lot of people stabbing in the back or whatever have you. I was pretty much done with the Navy at that point, and I signed away my waiver to basically re-enlist, which was just on a Form 1306. Once you gave up your quota, and particularly at that time frame, it was probably 2015, I signed it away. It was going to take a really big favor from someone very high ranking to be able to get that back. So the way I see it is that the Navy was just getting way too political. And mind you, I mean, I think we can all say, especially the veteran community and the LE community, you got the old timers like, oh, back in my day. Yeah, things change. But at this point, I feel like it was a newer change that we haven't seen before. And it was to the points where we kind of are all questioning and scratching our heads like, really? You gotta be that soft? Like, really? You can't even cuss at someone? I don't know. It just didn't make sense for a lot of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I actually ended up getting discharged out. I had a relationship at the time with someone, and I got discharged on a general discharge under honorable conditions. Long story short, it was one of the situations where kind of like the captain of our headquarters out of Florida wanted to make an example of an instructor. I just so happened to fit that piece in the moment. And it was unfortunate. I knew what I was doing. I knew the games we had to play. Definitely some, ill feelings about it at the time. Even now to this day, it's just kind
Hmm.
of shitty because it's like, well, if we look at the fraternization policy, which is really what they got me on, if you were to go up and down the flight line in the military and actually enforce a fraternization policy, you would lose half your fleet, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, I just so happened to be in a position where they could do that and they implemented that, and it was a long, grueling process. It kind of slammed the book on me on for the Uniform Code of Military Justice and non-judicial punishment for the military. It hit me on that pretty hard, and ended up just essentially getting out roughly a year early than what was my intended or contracted date to discharge out of the Navy. So not a big deal. I formed up a lot of my own understandings through experience in my life. That one is just one where I can relate to and say, it all ended up working out. The way
Yeah.
that my life has flown since 2016, almost 10 years now, right? Going on
Hmm.
9 years since I've been out. So everything kind of happens for a reason, and I think that's something I have learned to blindly trust along the way.
Hmm.
Um, even when we can't understand those reasons why, and that is very frustrating for a lot of us.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, well, I got out like a lot of veterans. I was pretty fucked up at the time. Despite understanding what happened and being accountable for my own shit, it still is a little bit of a slap in the face. I'm not trying to sound like I'm bragging, but I had a pretty damn good record. I was well
Yeah.
decorated. A lot of fully qualified on every level. I mean, at one point I was selected as a secondary backup for an officer program that was like the most competitive officer program to apply for while I was in the Navy. So I had all these kudos and everything on me, and just to kind of be told "fuck you," there's a door on the way out was still a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
The transition was really hard, man. If any of the veterans are listening, that they can relate. I mean, it's still hard today.
Yeah.
Trying to do that. I think Joe Rogan had something on his podcast a while back. He stated, you're in the military and you're going and doing all this cool shit, and you're all over the world and you're doing this, or maybe you're just in Afghanistan under deployments, which would suck, but it is what it is. But either way, you're doing things that the civilian sector does not afford you an opportunity to do,
Hmm.
right? And then you get out and you're like, what the hell do I do? Because it's a lifestyle that the military offers. I used to tell all my guys that because I used to be in charge of pretty much your most junior guys coming in the specific division within a squadron. And I tell all these guys, I was like, look, this isn't no 9 to 5. So you go home, you kiss your wife tonight, you tell her hi, and that you're happy that you checked into your new command, but you tell her right off that, hey, this is a lifestyle that you have to live. Um,
Yeah.
this is not a 9 to 5. So it took me a while to transition. I did a lot of different jobs. I was in a nonprofit, helping out with the soccer league there, which was dealing with a bunch of political nonprofit business stuff at the same time. I bounced around between multiple jobs, and then I kind of drifted into the construction industry, if you will, and specifically on the rail. I ended up working for a company that was one of the oversight managers for the high speed rail out there in California. And then I realized, very quickly how nasty the corporate world can be, in which, I was kind of back in the military at that point. But yeah, I did that, ended up getting let go of that job because I'm just simply speaking the truth and relaying over that nasty side of the corporate world. I just kind of told one of our oversight managers that, hey, look, we're having an internal meeting, and if you would like to know what we talk about, you're welcome to talk to our construction manager. Otherwise, no, we're not allowing outside parties to be in our company meeting. And they didn't like that too kindly, and
Hmm.
kind of removed my position from the project the next day. So got a heavy taste of what that was like, and it was humbling for sure. It was very
Yeah.
humbling. I wasn't happy with my job at the time, and I started therapy to backtrack a little bit once I got out of the Navy, my own personal therapy, right?
Hmm.
And I had a great therapist for about 5 years at that point, and until I left, California to move to Tennessee, and it was great. I learned a lot of stuff, man, and I was just at that point of, well, what the hell do I do next, right? Um,
Yeah.
Before I got let go from that job, I decided to go ahead and enroll in the master's program because I identified through all my experiences here, everything that I've talked about a little bit here with my life is I love helping people. I've had great leaders above me. I've had great opportunities when I was in the military and the civilian sector to be a leader. And, for myself, it was like, well, I have a lot of complaints in the world on the way that things are. And maybe this is just me to be able to not just talk the talk, but I can walk the walk, right? I can sit back and actually help people with some pretty heavy shit that they're dealing with
Hmm.
because I've been there and I've done that and I still am, continuing to grow and go through my own stuff. And I think that's related to leadership, related to being a therapist. I think that's one of the reasons why I've had the success I've had because it's not the objective of like, you got to be perfect all the fucking time. That's an
No.
illusion. That's a
Hmm.
utopia that is not achievable. It's actually reversed where we are going through it too.
Yeah.
And maybe we have been through it and we can provide help that way, which is great. But
Hmm.
also admitting the fact that, yeah, I am dealing with this or I am struggling with this. And as I continue my process, I'm still going to help you and at the same time.
Yeah,
And
I think there's so
yeah,
much value in that, man. Sorry to interrupt, but like I
no, you're
think
good.
that
Yeah.
too often we, whatever our position, right? Like
Hmm.
we're going to talk about leadership so broadly, and I mean, I hope the audience is hearing all of your adversities, but also this theme of like a prevailing positive growth mindset, where it's just like, yeah, stumbled there, oh, my mouth got me in trouble there, but I had to do me, I had to speak the truth. Very humbling, and here I am, and things have worked out in this positive way, not just because they do, but because you have the awareness and maybe the fortitude to make it a lesson, for yourself and where you need to go, right? Hey, I don't
Hmm.
belong here, I belong over here, or I'm going to try this route over here. And that's really, I mean, part of why I wanted to kind of interject is like that's really why I wanted you to come on the show, is because a lot of the things you're putting out on social media or some of our conversation prior was really just recognizing, yeah, like it's not about being polished, but it's about it being, but sharing, and in some ways that vulnerability is to invite others to recognize they absolutely shouldn't. I mean, they're not going to be, but they shouldn't try to be perfect, right? They shouldn't try
Yeah.
to be polished all the time. And that's oftentimes where I feel and find that you make the best connection is when you are bringing someone along to say, "Hey, I've been there, or I'm still there," right? And that's
Hmm.
a reflection I've had as of late for sure, just grappling with stress. And you said the illusion of perfection, and I like, I'm reminded, and I call it the illusion of like quote unquote work life balance,
Hmm.
because what is that? Is that even a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, man. We have to maintain that humbleness,
Hmm.
right? My experience has shown me, I've met people from every single state. I think I've been to like 9 different countries. And going back to kind of like that approach with communication, when you're able to present this humbleness and this ease, I guess is one of the best ways you can say it, and showing that, look, this is just this is what I'm bringing to the table.
Hmm.
You know, I'm no better than you, and you're no better than me. Um, we may have different experiences, but we're at the same time. What really matters is how are you prioritizing your life? You know, um, what are you doing to be that good person, to be that
Hmm.
man? Like, what does that man? What is the definition of that man, right? Well, I mean, definition, I think, other than just simply being a good human being, is making sure that our priorities are taken care of. Not just putting fucking food on the table for your wife and kids. I mean, yeah, absolutely, that should be a given, right? But aside from that, like, how are you there? Are you there for them when they need it? Like,
Hmm.
dude, you shared a video the other day. I saw that with your, I think it was one of your kids, your daughter, right?
Yeah,
Where you
yeah.
showed that you tried, you attempted, but then you failed, right? But then you showed that you attempted again and you succeeded. And I mean, that's it. That's the type of stuff right there, dude. I mean, and that was, what, maybe 30 seconds of that day
Yeah.
that you were spending with her.
Mhm.
And but the reality is, of course, outside of social media, you're obviously putting a priority to be there for her. I think it's easy for us men to be pressured into these things in life, and even sometimes get addicted to the rush with it, right?
Oh yeah.
To that grind, to the overachieving, to the constant, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing?
Yeah.
And then we end up neglecting all these other parts. Well, you might be a man, like, as a gender, but are you really fulfilling the roles as a man that you should be? Are you neglecting your wife? And there's no
Yeah.
doubt, to be on that humble side, I sure as hell haven't been the perfect husband, by any means,
No,
right?
I don't know. I don't know that person. That person probably doesn't exist is kind of the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, for reference, like the post was basically, pushing my daughter at the swings, and I was kind of bored, and I was trying to like kind of stretch out, and I was like, oh, I bet I could do pull ups up on the top of the swing set, right? And I will say, normally not an issue for my monkey arms, but that thing was so slick, I couldn't get it a grip. But then I ended up kind of like just kind of monkeying up the thing, and she was so surprised. Like, there's no sound in the video of her, but she like reacted, right? And she's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, daddy!" Like, and then she's like, "Can I do it?" And I'm like, "Of course." So I lift her up. She's like, "Oh, I'm scared." Okay, all right, cool. Like, go play and go swing. But that's kind of the point, right? And I love how you kind of blend those things, because we are supposed to be guides and providers and protectors as parents. But when we think about the really stereotypical, like, traditional model of like, yeah, I'll physically protect you. It's like, well, the world is more complicated than that. Like, that is a
Mhm.
very real thing, but how can I actually show up and protect my family, being my wife and my daughter, if they don't feel safe sharing their fears, whether they're
Mhm.
physical, tangible, or whether they're, fast forward, at some point it's going to be, social media or like bullying, or some point it's going to be the pressures of, whatever she's going through. Like, if I can't be soft for her, then how can I trust that she can trust me, right? And come to me with
Yeah.
whatever the thing is. And so that is not me preaching by any means. That is me acknowledging that has to be an intention, because to your point, like, that grind is so pervasive. And I've had that many times, and I have to continue to toggle it when people are like, I don't know how you do the things you do with social media and the podcast and your career. And it's not, I'm in a busy department. It's not like one of those like small towns where, things just kind of happen if they happen.
Mhm.
And it is because I have this driver, but it's not always a good thing. And a lot of times
Yeah.
it's not, it's actually, I don't want to even say bad thing. It's not the best thing, for
Mhm.
my real intent, which is to be a dad before, a career guy. But
Yeah.
our lives are not designed for that. When it's 40 plus hours a week, I'm not with my daughter, for 40 plus hours a week and in
Absolutely.
awake time, right? So it's kind of slippery in that way.
Mhm. It's something we have to keep in check, man, and that's why, like, self-awareness is big. It's one of the things I work with a lot with therapy, is bringing that back to self-awareness, even with, some really in-depth, fucked up trauma situations for people. I don't think there's ever a client I've ever worked with where we haven't dove into self-awareness.
Hmm.
So men and women alike, it's easy for us to miss over that subconscious side of ourselves that comes out in situations. I mean, it's just kind of like what people may even consider like the muscle memory, right? If I told you to go
The
tie your
default, right?
shoes, yeah, hop on that bicycle and ride that bike right now, you're not gonna have to think about that. You're not have to physically, intentionally sit there and be like, okay, left foot down, pedal, okay,
Hmm.
crossover, bunny loop, whatever. You don't have to think that out because it's all just more built into our subconscious. It's the way the
Hmm.
brain works. That being said, being more aware of certain subconscious aspects, or what we consider to be parts of ourselves, and
Yeah.
that is, I think, a main goal for all of us, because that grind as men, right, as leaders, man or woman, as a leader, it's very easy to get wrapped up into that. Oh, well, I'm getting this feel good. I'm getting that serotonin release, that dopamine
Hmm.
release, and where, I'm locked in that contract, or I closed this deal, or I did this, or I got this qualification. And I'm not saying that anyone shouldn't pursue those, but I'm just saying that we need to be aware so that they don't overtake our lives, and reprioritize how things are. And there is no doubt there is an extremely difficult balance to that. And there is no doubt it is extremely difficult to be intentional about it, because we get wrapped up in things. I mean, shit happens. You get
Yeah.
very focused on something one day, and then you just get hung up on it. And then next thing you know, all these hours go by. I'm like, oh man, I'm late to my kid's soccer game. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I get it. It happens. And it's like what we talked about before. We're not making excuses for anything,
Yeah.
but It's if we examine what is on the plate, right, and get really fine tuned into that. If we actually want that fucking growth, we want that ability to be better in areas in our lives. Well, that's what it takes.
Mm-hmm.
It takes this fanatical attention to detail. It takes not just the desire or the want to make change. It takes our ability to be very self-aware and accept our mistakes, own our mistakes, be okay with the fact that we're gonna make mistakes, even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Apply that humble humility, right, and then be able to still go out there and lead or accomplish whatever it is we have to do.
Yeah, and there's several things in what you said there and what you've been saying through this conversation, which is like, hey, that introspection, like know thyself. And then, we talked about it in the form of the traffic stop, but like what is the goal? And I kind of nodded to that more recently in the conversation, but that is what I want people to think about, especially because the listenership is so prevalently first responders. And then there's some military and there's some crossover Venn diagram, right? Like
Mhm.
military veterans and first responders. But then there's a lot of people that are just very like-minded and supportive. So are some personality tendencies that tend to be high drive people. They're listening to these conversations about resilience and fitness and mindset. And so with that, it's like knowing thyself, knowing that you are more inclined to dive into the things you deal with, like very wholeheartedly. And then you have that competitive nature and you have that tendency to grind and maybe over grind at times. And it's knowing like, you said parts, and it makes me think of IFS, right? Like it's integrated. Is it internal or integrated family systems?
It's internal family systems.
Internal,
Yeah.
yeah. So at the time this airs, I'm guessing probably a couple months prior, episode of Robin Saunier will air,
Mhm.
but that will have aired. But that we do a dive in on that, like kind of we have these little parts of us, and why are we the way we are? As far as like default reactions to things or our tendencies. So
Yeah.
very impactful episode for me. But it's just to say, like, okay, knowing that, not to blame or shame that part that wants to grind. There's a lot of value in that, right? There's a lot of why I have the life I have is because I've grinded at times. But it's also to say, hey, there's also this part that needs to be allowed the spotlight and say,
Mhm.
okay, it's now time to toggle down and be present, right? Like, and man, at the end of the day, and I say maybe at the end of this life with, the most wisdom we can acquire, sometimes my buddy has jokingly said this about my fitness and nutrition like regimen because I was doing every extreme thing for a while and
Mhm.
he'd always want to ask what I was doing at the time because I was like I was doing keto this or intermittent fasting. He's like, "Dude, I bet when you're 65, you're going to just have figured it out and figuring it out is going to be kind of doing like a moderate amount of everything." And I
Yeah.
feel like, I'm pretty like I'm getting closer to that already. I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
you're probably right." And I would say that back then, like there's no quick, there's no perfect anything. It's just do pretty good most of the time, right? But I think that that's a
Yeah.
flip for us too, because a lot of why I talk about the things I talk about is because I have over invested or overcompensated or counterbalanced in these more extreme ways because that's my personality type, and that's a personality type of a lot of people that listen in, which just to say like give yourself a bit of grace and then that like let that be a part of you, right? That
Yeah.
allows this kind of recalibration. I think if we were like, the 80-20 rule, right? You could apply that to everything. But I think if when you're at work, if you're focused 80% of the time with 80% intensity, you're probably going to be a fantastic, way productive, valued employee. But then toggle that with like, hey, when you're with your kid at the sports game, don't shame yourself if you check your phone once or twice, but like 80% of the time, be focused on the sports game. 80% of the time, be like, thinking about the present moment and the outdoors and how awesome it is that you can have the flexibility to watch your kid's game. And then, it doesn't have to be 100 because then I feel like that's where we burn out. We get this like angst that and this almost this guilt with not being like on all the time in what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, man, and I fully agree with it. So you nailed it. The one word that stuck out to me was grace, right?
Mm,
Having that grace for ourselves. Now, at the same time, I do think having that extreme drive, it can be good.
yeah.
Look, I think a lot of things in life, it's not that they're necessarily good or bad. I think it's about how we use them,
Mm, yeah.
how we let them come out. Like that grind, for example. Yeah, the grind can be bad if it overtakes your life, right? But if you use it in the right ways in the appropriate time, not so bad. It's not so much of a bad thing, right?
Yeah,
It
for
can be very
sure. Yeah.
useful. So that's kind of being mindful, having that mindset, having that self awareness of like, hey, what do we do? When do we apply that? I mean, going to the LE community, I mean, that's a perfect example. We talked about the approaches with things. If a cop comes out and I'll give you another example. So I got pulled over. It was like 2:30 in the morning. I was just
What are
hauling
you
ass
doing, man?
home. It's the middle of the night. No one's out.
Yeah, that's
I've
fair.
been up
That's
for
fair.
23 hours. I'm tired. I want to get home. And cop pulled me over, and so I did all the right thing, and I rolled down my passenger side, and took the keys out of the ignition, turned off my truck, put them on the dash for him, and everything. And so I took my keys out, and my lights lit up on my tail lights, right,
Mm,
and even like the reverse lights. So I
yeah.
saw the guy in my mirror kind of stop with his light and looking at me like,
Yeah.
what the hell is this guy doing? And
Well,
I
now I'm
totally
like thinking
understand.
like you're overly compliant because most people don't turn the car off unless they're getting like they're in a stolen car. They've been through that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I told the guy I was coming back from a shooting event. Me and some buddies with this group I work with, tenant group. Um, we have this had an off-road shooting series that we did, and I was like, hey, yeah, this bunch of special forces guys I work with, yada yada. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, were you trying to go in the reverse? I was like, no, sir. I just put my keys right here. And he's like, okay, but imagine
Hmm.
like that approach of like if he would have been like, oh, what are you doing? Just like what the hell is wrong with you, right? And
Yeah.
totally different outcome.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's how that kind of like, all relates back over together. Where if we have that right focus and that right mindset and the approach, we can get those outcomes that we want.
Yeah. Yeah. And that cop can like, as the car doesn't move, like good on him that he pauses.
Hmm.
And should he consider maybe this person's going to go in reverse or try to hit me? Like, absolutely. But
Yeah,
then
for
when it
sure.
doesn't happen and he sees a seemingly compliant driver with both hands on the wheel, then it's like, okay, I don't have to treat him like he's tried to assault me because I have no evidence of that. I will be cautious. I'll remain cautious through the entirety of this thing
Hmm.
until I have evidence otherwise, right? Like and that's what I want people to listening in to think about is not like Matt's not saying like, hey, like de-escalate completely, but like, no, just like pay attention to all the inputs coming in. But that's just like an example from a traffic stop. And
Yeah,
I would say is suggesting is like, how do we build that out to like the entirety of our lives and the different things we're doing and our different interactions and
yeah,
all of that.
absolutely. And I had a brain fart in the middle when I was saying that, and you just brought back up for the other part I was kind of alluding to, which is um, having discretion, right?
Mm,
Um, the ability to trust yourself, to trust your instincts, right? So one of the things um, I noticed in the military a little bit, but definitely in the civilian world was when people would get into this thing what I call a robotic mindset, right? The robotic mindset being for the audience is just like, yeah, okay, it says to turn left, I'm going to turn left, right?
mm,
Not questioning it ever, not even thinking about it. Oh, they said, to show up here and go ahead and perform this task. I'm going to perform that task to a T without using any discretion, any judgment. That's that robotic mindset where
yeah,
people I feel get wrapped up into as a whole. I believe it's problematic. Um, as a cop, it's important you have that discretion. As a
yeah,
person, it's important we have that discretion, and that's also learning to trust ourselves, understanding instinct. Like, what is that telling you? One example I've used in therapy with people when talking about like learning how to retrust yourself, trust your body, because there's a lot of things that are somatic, and I'm sure you may have heard about this before, and others may have heard about that. But a simple example is like if you're leaving a restaurant with some friends, and it's like a 5 minute walk to go get to your car in the parking lot, but then you see this alleyway.
hmm,
Instead of walking around, you could take this alleyway, and it's going to save you 2 minutes. But then you look down and you're like, kind of get like maybe a tingle on the back of your neck.
hmm, hmm,
See that person, maybe they're drugged out or whatever out by the dumpster, and you're kind of like, mm, yeah, I don't feel so well going down there. Trust that.
yeah, yeah. And
Your
there's like,
body's telling you something, right?
hmm,
You can trust yourself to use that instinct and not have that robotic mindset that says, yes, shortcut saves me 2 minutes, going that way, don't care.
yeah, yeah. It makes me think about when you said discretion and a lot of cops listening in, like we know how, okay, like do you enforce, do you not enforce? But I like the application to like discretion for life. Like, how are you treating your stimulus and decisions, right? And even that like example makes me think of kind of this accept things as they are, right? Listen to that. Like, don't need to judge it. I also don't need to be like, okay, there's a guy that may or may not be under the influence of something. If I go around, is that prejudicial? No, just go around. Like, it's fine. Like, don't, like, you're not labeling him. You're just listening to your stimulus and like, hey, I'm gonna walk this way. It's fine. I don't need to think down the weeds of like deep, like dark alley and what might be in there. I just know I feel less comfortable about that because of all in this time outside of the decision, we can recognize, okay, yeah, because our evolutionary biology and all these things, and we literally can't see things down an alley, so there might be things, and rather than find out in the moment, I could just go around where it's
Yeah.
well lit. Like, it's just, we don't have to apply logic to it, but we can if we want to, if it helps us.
Mhm.
But it makes me think about earlier part of the conversation, like, just try to remove like this good or bad, because we can assign that to others, meaning that we'll certainly assign it to ourselves. But just like be and just keep rolling with it and know what your goal is and keep working toward it. It makes me think of Zen. I've been learning a lot about Zen and nerding out on Bruce Lee lately. Are you a fan, or you know kind of the direction I'm going with like his philosophy and stuff like that?
I'm not super familiar with it, but I mean a little bit familiar with it, and probably some other aspects that not necessarily are Bruce Lee directly related. But yeah, yeah, by
Mhm.
all means, I kind of know where you're going with that, with energy
Yeah.
and everything
Yeah,
else.
it's almost like, the light can't exist without the dark, and so it's like it's no judgment, it just is. Everything is, and it's a combination of each other and everything. And people are probably gonna be like, "Man, this is getting really woo," but that's okay. It's
Yeah,
just something that I've been kind of nerding out on, because my tendency is as I talked about before, like as a child and young man, I thought in absolutes, and it does not serve me well, right? And so
Mhm.
even if it's something like my misstep or my misjudgment or my mistakes, many that I've shared very publicly, on this show or otherwise through this project, is just in hopes that other people can live like more forthrightly the way that they need to live, in a way that serves them. It's not to say take this because Eric says so, or take that because Matt says so. I appreciate this conversation because I like to think that it just helps people just receive things, be curious, consider them, and then, Bruce Lee, like, take what's useful, right? And use that
Yeah.
and discard what's not. Man, I can't believe that almost an hour has passed already, but there is like one thing, and maybe it's going to take a little bit, but maybe
All right.
there's kind of a way you want to attack it. But what one of the things that we talked about that I wanted to prompt you about
Mhm.
was this approach to therapy, and I wager that everyone that's listened this far would be like, okay, Matt's not your typical therapist. And
Yeah.
you actually had a post about it a while ago, and right now it's like third week of April, so maybe it was like March or even February, maybe, when you're
Yeah, I
kind of
think
like
so.
saying like a lot of therapy is not particularly useful. And I
Mhm.
want to ask you, kind of peel that back, like, why did you take that stance, and what do you mean by that, and what do you suggest people look for in therapy, or what's helped you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I appreciate you acknowledging I'm not your typical therapist. Absolutely. I mean, kind of for the audience. I mean, I feel I bring in an approach that's a little bit more refreshing. I feel that this approach is something that is more needed, that we don't see a lot with in the mental health community as a whole. A
Mhm.
lot of therapy, I feel, is not beneficial or useful to us because it's not really fucking solving anything. For example, we'll take just a very simple, common thing. Someone comes in with anxiety. What I feel, and even from my own personal experience, me and my wife, we've had couples counseling. I've gotten back into therapy, on my own. All the therapist does is just provide you a sounding board and just validates you. So it'd be like, oh yeah, that does sound like it was an anxious situation. Oh man, yeah.
Mm. Mhm.
Like, okay, that's all well and good, but what the fuck are you doing? Right? You're
Mhm.
not helping your anxiety. You're not improving how you manage it. You're not improving how to regulate that, how to cope with it. I mean, first off, and let's using anxiety, it's a natural feeling, just as smiling and being happy. Were you to come to therapy because you're fucking happy about an event that happened in your life? I mean, come on, right? Anxiety can kind
Yeah.
of be looked at
Mhm.
the same way. It's just we look at it as how is it impacting you negatively? Okay. Where therapy doesn't become effective is the fact that, look, just like any profession out there, you can have a passion for something, but that's not good enough. As a cop, you can have a passion for wanting to give back to your community. Well, that's great. I applaud you for that, especially if you're thinking about being a cop in today's society, right? Good for you.
Sure.
That's awesome. But that's not good enough to be a good cop, to be an
Yeah.
effective cop, right?
Hmm.
There's a whole big, saddle of stuff behind you that you're going to have to tackle on with that job. Therapists, I find they don't have the right skills, the right tools to be a good therapist. My personal experience, and from what I have heard within others, and say in the past, 10 years of master programs, because you could become a therapist, you have to go through a master's program, and then you have to follow the state's licensing requirements before you can even become licensed, or at
Hmm.
least fully licensed, right? So, that being said, their programs discuss a lot about modalities, the different theories that are out there.
Hmm.
Sure, depending on your state, it can vary, but essentially, they cover some ethics, they cover modalities to be used, they cover theories, different, postmodern or modern day theories to understand things. But that, it's kind of the extent of where that goes. They don't tell you how. How do you help that? And I get it to a point because every case is going to be different. Jim and John, who are dealing with depression with an exact background, they could be identical twins, are not going to be treated the same way because they're still two different people. There could be
For
this
sure.
slight piece that's off,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people hearing this, especially I've heard this about guys and specific people I know in my circles where they don't they finally get up to the courage or the curiosity or combination therein to entertain therapy, maybe at the begrudging the hard nudging and elbows from their circles, but that is a theme I've heard, which is dissatisfying, which is like, I don't need to just be validated. I don't need to
Mhm,
be told that this thing was traumatic or that thing is hard or that, yeah, um, I'm not super jazzed about my childhood or what happened at work over the last few years. I
mhm,
already knew that. That's why I'm here. And so to hear this perspective of like a real talkness, which I think is very much part of your thing, but like let's figure out some tools. I'm going to be your wingman, right, in this process, and like maybe suggest some modalities or ask some prompts. I've certainly been asked some prompts or some questions, or even like a paraphrase, or asked me to paraphrase what I just said with certain guidance in therapy. That's been
mhm,
really useful because it provides this external and this nudged perspective, right? Like, I can't think of an example right now, but almost to say that this person I feel is in my corner,
mhm,
and not just nodding and saying, yeah, I feel for you and that's hard, but saying, hey, what do you think about this? Where
mhm.
I've been like, huh. And sometimes I've really had to sit with it and be like, that is a very interesting question or prompt. And then having to kind of peel that back and work that back and, wonder where it comes from and what I want to do about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's just part of it is there's not enough of a standard out there that can really be enforced to be a therapist or any type of mental health professional, really, at the end of the day. Other than, okay, yeah, the degrees are there, the licensure is there, but how to apply that, you can't really, and maybe it's probably arguably even to a point where you don't want to set a certain standard that you have to be this type of personality or whatever. Because look, at the end of the day, everyone's needed. I still believe that to a certain extent, but I also know that just because someone says they're a trauma therapist doesn't mean they know shit about trauma.
Yeah. And you hear a lot of trauma therapists echo that, especially in the responder, right? Like
Yeah.
the service industries, like
Mhm.
veterans, like first responders. A lot of people can put whatever they want next to their name in their profile, and they may or may not have actual, I think, awareness or training or experience
Yeah.
with those communities, right?
Yeah, and then even the training, I mean, because training is a big thing within therapy, or the CEs, the continued education, right? And I mean, that's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with becoming informed, but are you competent, right?
Hmm.
If you take the quote of like Goodwill Hunting, where he's sitting there with a bench on the bench, Robin Williams and Matt Damon, and he's like, "You think I know what the first thing on what it's like to be an orphan because I read Oliver Twist?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing for therapists, I mean, and that kind of leads over to your other part of your question that is, well, how do we know? Well, First thing is for me, I think everyone should look up, Psychology Today, or I think it's therapist.com. There's a few websites out there. Psychology Today is probably the biggest one where they actually list out therapists and you can actually see what they write. Okay. Most of the time, they will have some type of contact information. Now, the barrier that people are going to come into is if they work for a clinic, you may not be able to actually contact them ahead of time. Like
Mm.
I offer free consults, and actually
Yeah,
I
I've seen that a
prefer to
lot. Yeah.
do a free consult with someone because number one, I want to make sure that I can help them. I
Hmm.
want to understand like what it is you're coming to therapy for because maybe it's something that I'm not going to be the specialist or the right person for you, right?
Yeah.
And they also gives them a chance to kind of like hear who I am, right?
Hmm.
Um, Especially with my personality and everything else. So they understand that and that they feel like I'm still a good fit for you. Okay, great, let's move forward.
Yeah.
Um, but being able to speak to a therapist ahead of time, I think is real helpful. Whether you can email them or if they have a number, you can contact them and say, hey, can we do a quick consult? That way you're not getting too much into the weeds. Looking for life experiences is the like number one thing. And might be able to find someone in their late 20s who has a ton of life experience that can help you better than someone in their 50s that, no offense to them, but doesn't really have a lot of life
Yeah.
experience. They
Or
lived in this,
irrelevant
yeah,
life experience, right? Because of what you're
exactly.
going through, what you're working through, and dynamics.
Yeah, so I mean, that all plays in, um, knowing that, they have this experience under the belt. Now, unfortunately, the reality is you're just going to have to try. Now, if you're using insurance, it's not as big of a deal, versus coming out of pocket and wasting that time and money, essentially. But you're gonna just have to go in there. What you should be looking for from a therapist is someone that's challenging you. I mean, like you said yourself, Eric, right? It's just like, okay, well, what else does that mean? Like,
Hmm.
how are you doing that? Like, okay, you have anxiety, so what? Now what? How is that impacting your life? What are you trying to do? Like someone who's continuing to challenge and explore thoughts and ideas with you, regardless of really the reasons why you're there for therapy. I think that's key. Sure, you might have a day or a session where that whole session or half the session is just kind of a bitch session. You just gotta vent it out. Great. Therapy can be used for that. But in the bigger goal outcome perspective, like they should be challenging you, not just supporting you, because I think therapists have this idea that just because they show up, they're somehow effectively able to work towards goals with someone, and that's not the case. You have to really be able to dig deep, or they need to be able to handle it. I mean, I've heard cases where therapists are crying or
Yep.
upset, like really disturbed by hearing some fucked up shit that either
Yep.
cops have been through or veterans have been through or
Yeah.
just life experiences. They got to be able to handle that. I mean,
Yeah.
that,
And
that's
there's a
that's real
there's a
important.
format that like might be fine because of relationship and like it shows like, hey, I'm with you, but also like it can't be the go-to like, especially newer in a relationship if a first responder is talking about these really hard calls and the
Mhm.
therapist is not adequately culturally competent and is affected, not just tearing up and talking through it, but like affected. How
Mhm.
messed up does that maybe make that first responder and how dejected might they feel about therapy or the practice or and I appreciate you kind of giving these examples tangibly, like how to explore a
Mhm.
fit, the right fit, because
Yeah,
we've all met someone outside of therapy, like just met somebody, and we're like, did we just become best friends? And
yeah.
we've also met like I think we're meant to be mortal enemy, right? Like you've met
Mhm.
this. I don't think that we're gonna jive,
Mhm.
whether it's a dentist or whether it's a freaking someone at the grocery store. You're like, I'm gonna use the other checker line now because I get these vibes and I just really I don't
Yeah.
like it. Right? Trust that intuition, right? Going back to that
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure I will or could get a lot of flack for this, but fuck them. It's we're
Yeah.
here to be ethical as therapists, just like doctors,
Hmm.
dentists. Everything is based on code of ethics. I mean, the reality is, as a therapist, if you're following the codes of ethics, but you break the law, the legal law, you might be fine. Good chances you're probably going to be fine. But if you are following the law and you break the code of ethics, oh, okay, you're done for. Maybe we're going to suspend your license or whatever else,
Yeah.
right? That being said, a therapist needs to kind of put in, a good therapist will put in the approach of kind of being a coach. Now, in grad school, they generally teach you, and it's even harped about in the national associations, you know, never tell a client what to do. Well, I'm going to kind of sit here and call bullshit on that. What do you mean never tell a client what to do? because a therapist is in a unique position. We're in a controlled environment and we are unbiased, right? We don't have a relationship with you 99% of the time. There's a few exceptions,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what allows a therapist to be able to see things from the perspectives that they do. Therefore, that person coming to you is kind of looking at you like, well, hey, what should I do? And I'm not saying that a therapist needs to tell them every single thing, like step by step,
For
lay
sure.
it out. But there's a technique that basically therapists can do where you work with someone and you guide them to discover what to do. And yeah, sometimes it is kind of like, what should you do? I mean, there's been cases that where I do say some pretty black and white. Well, I really want to encourage you not to do that. I don't think you should do it
Yeah, well, that's
because
yeah,
you
and I
can
want to
get
make
this
that
and that.
discernment because that's what I hear and that kind of what I'm reading between the lines is like we should all get cautious as humans and people, really cautious with absolutes, like never. Okay,
Mhm.
so if I'm like, hey man, I'm having a bad day and I have a plan, you're gonna tell me you're good. Like that guidance would say never. Hey, for you to say, hey, stay on the phone and don't
Mhm.
do that plan. That's a no no, right? Because that
Yeah,
you the thing was never tell me what to do. And so if you say,
mhm.
hey, don't hurt yourself, that breaks that plan, right?
Yeah,
And what I
of
hear
course.
too is like that guidance, right? Like, of course, I think that most of us acknowledge that a therapist is not to tell, like, to make a decision for me. If I'm like, hey, like, I'm super stressed at work. Should I change my career? Like, I don't expect my therapist to be like, "Yeah, man, go back to school. You got savings. Like, let's figure. Just do it." It's gonna be probably asking me questions on a path to guidance. Like, okay, like
Mhm.
let's remind me of the priorities we talked about it last week. Okay, what is your goal? Okay, what is not fulfilling you?
Mhm.
Okay, with those things in mind, what are your thoughts? Kind of like working through it. Like,
Yes,
and so then you are
exactly.
guiding me. You're not telling me what to do, but you're not just like crossing your arms and be like, I don't know. How do you feel about it? Like,
Yeah.
I
What do
literally
you think you
asked you
should
like
do?
to help me through this. Yeah.
I can't. I laugh about it, man, because it's. I think I did a in that video you're referring to. I kind of did that little joke in there. My inner Bill Burr. Anyone who
Mm.
knows the comedian Bill
Mm-hmm.
Burr with the
Yeah.
angry,
He swears
comical
too.
jokes. Yeah, he's like, "What do you mean? What do you think, or what do I think I should do? I just fucking asked you. Isn't that what I'm paying you for? So like, fucking tell me
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to do. I asked you the question. No shit, I don't know." Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny and it is comical, but there's a serious matter because I know that there's therapists out there that would revert back and say, "Well, what do you think you should do?" Like, how's that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. They're obviously, if the therapist was a little bit more in tune with what was going on, they'd understand this person is at a loss of direction. They're probably a little bit stressed, maybe a little overwhelmed with it, but they don't obviously know what to do. So maybe that choice of words of asking them, "What do you think you should do?" It may not be the best in that moment. Maybe it's
Sure.
a different choice of words that can surround that,
Yeah.
but still, like you said, provide that guidance. And that's how you can tell when a therapist is really there to work with you. We are
Yeah.
digging to the root of the problem. We're providing new solutions through guidance and through collaborative discovery with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, oftentimes therapists can know a client better than they know themselves. So
Sure.
because of that unique approach, that unique perspective that we therapists come into play with, and that's why that guidance, that's why that ability to say, yes, yeah, maybe we should go this route or start exploring different routes is critical for the success of therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Even for someone to be like, okay, like that's a hard decision. Like, what are your three most what are the three things that jump out at you? And maybe I kind of talk through things, and therapists like, okay, what are you afraid? Which one's the scariest? Why do you think that is? Right? Like, they're not telling me what to do again, but like I have to do the work, and that's where I appreciate the doing the work. It's not, for those that have not entertained it, and more likely people listening in, it's maybe peer support types of, kind of resources or people in the circle that might say, okay, I have used therapy on and off, or I use it, cool, it works for me, but how do I have people think about it in a different format? It's like you can't just show up for your call or your Zoom or in the office and be like, okay, 40 minutes later or 50 minutes later, I'm slightly better than before. It's like, what did you bring? Like, what
Mhm.
intention did you bring? What vulnerability did you bring? And
Yeah.
I would never ask everyone to just like check all their guardedness at the door, right? Like,
Mhm.
you have that protective mechanism, that part which has gotten you to where you are now. It makes you successful in life and job and all these things, but it is to say like you have to do work. Like this,
Yeah.
if people have been credited to being introspective or whatnot, like it's usually because you spent a lot of time and effort working on that. It
Yeah.
doesn't just happen. So
Absolutely. It's funny because it goes to the self-awareness and the introspective aspect. Like, I had a client once tell me, he admitted to me, he just straight up said, "Hey man, I don't want to do any therapy anymore. I'm just not ready to face my shit." That was
Mm,
his literal words. "I'm not ready to
yeah,
face any more of my shit." Dude, that
yeah.
in a therapist perspective, it's still success because at
It's
least
awareness, right?
we've got we've got the client to that point. Like, maybe he continues to get better, maybe he comes back later. I don't know,
Yeah,
but he's at that point of that awareness to say like, "Hey, this shit sucks. Like, I don't want to keep going through it," and that's okay. We don't have
yeah,
to. Like,
yeah.
therapy's
Because
great,
maybe,
but yeah,
yeah, what that person needs, or maybe what that person would benefit from is taking a break, and or
mhm,
whether that with that clinician or a different one, it's like, okay, cool. I could keep kind of like dragging all these skeletons out of the closet of childhood or what have you, or my trauma or traumatic experiences, and or I could work on mindset for like how do I know it's there. I don't need to drag it all out and talk it through all the time, but I could recognize the tools that we're talking about. Like, how
yeah,
do you notice, your body tensing up in stress? And okay, like what has been working? How has breath work worked? How has journaling worked? Like, these kind of things. And
mhm,
so again, just to invite people to not just to discard the whole concept of therapy and all the thousands, millions of ways that can look with different clinicians and different practices and different intentions coming into a session.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's therapy's great, but look, it is a bit of a luxury. I'm not gonna lie. I think you can perfectly go on about your life and even live a successful, what you may consider to be a successful life, depending how you define it, without ever going to therapy.
Yeah.
Now, the caveat to that is that the maybe one measure of success, but the fulfillment of your life could be impacted through that.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm all for therapy, and I think if you have the right therapist, it can be very beneficial. But you don't have to. You can go about your life and never have to go through therapy, but you're going to be limited. I promise you that. Unless if you find other sources that can break through to you on those levels, yeah, you're not going to
Yeah.
have that full extent that you could potentially have.
I like to think of it as like it's a tool, and it's a very, very valid tool. I am sure there's a lot of recognitions I've gained through specifically therapy that I would not have gotten only from journaling and reading and talking to my wife and talking to my buddy. Can people get all that type of stuff with a different combination? Maybe, because they're not me, right? And maybe I'd get it later, having not used any therapy or talked to any clinician. Maybe.
Mhm.
Who freaking knows? But the point is it's a thing, and give it a chance. And if you've had a negative experience, like, consider what Matt's saying and what a lot of clinicians are saying to, like, you know, do the work internally, but also vetting and feeling out like these free consults. So I love a lot of these tangible takeaways that I think could be very useful to a lot of people with regards to therapy in general. But man, we've been going. We could go for hours, I'm
Yeah,
sure. But
I'm sure.
I
Yeah,
do want to thank you for your time
yeah,
and
absolutely, brother.
ask you to, if there's any thoughts you have kind of wrapping us all together. I know we went a lot of different directions and I love it. And I hope that the listeners loved it too. But please, like, any closing thoughts and then where people can find you, social media, if they want to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, closing thoughts wise, look, everything's a fucking choice in life, right? Not choosing is a choice too.
Hmm.
So, you and everyone who's listening, we have our potential, and it's our ability to choose how far we take that potential. Like you said, brother, therapy's not the end all be all type solution here. Nothing is. So, that's
Yeah.
kind of the beauty behind it. But if you're not looking at all the aspects in your life, like key aspects, mind, body, soul, how are you physically active? Where are you at mentally, your mindset? Where are you at spiritually? Those aspects are so crucial in life. So where you can't go to the gym and then eat like crap and expect to achieve a fitness goal. That's just insanity. It's not going to work, right? So there's a lot of things that we can look at in our life, in addition to therapy, that can be beneficial. Are you getting some sunlight on you? Or what's your blood work? When's the last time you've been to the fucking doctor and had your blood levels taken to see where you are? Because maybe that's an indication. Because I promise you,
Hmm.
there's certain blood levels that will impact your depression, that will impact your anxiety, for example. So looking at all of those things, it might sound daunting, but that's just the mindset and perspective you have on it. If you look at it as more of a blessing and an opportunity to provide you better solutions, then the whole game changes with how you move forward with it. It's not something that is exhausting. So, if you can set your mind to it, as they say, it can happen. If you can visualize it and you want it bad enough, it will happen. Just be a good person and understand that, especially for the main community that's targeted here, you guys aren't fucking alone. I promise you. And there's a lot of resources out there nowadays, and there are some good therapists out there as well that can help you and also give you the tools that you need to move forward. But you just have to make that choice, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. If anyone wants to find me, I'm on Instagram, holistic.practical.psychology. That's my Instagram handle. You probably find me by searching my name. You might find my other page, which is book_of_Twinkie. That's my shooting page. So I got a couple different pages if you just search my name.
Right.
But yeah, the psychology one, I try to put out a lot of good self-help stuff. And that's where primarily the psychology aspect of it come in. The shooting stuff is just doing a bunch of cool shit.
Yeah. Keep it light. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. I appreciate it, brother.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.